Mech pilots, online. BattleTech manuals, online. Long-term memory, offline. All systems bungled. Initiating BungleTech podcast.
In today's deployment of BungleTech, we talk about why BattleTech with our Spheroid co-host Michael. Reflect on a dead summoner pilot in our battlefield highlight. Talk about a huge rule mistake I've been making for years. And read a sample of a story from Shrapnel. It's gonna get spicy. Strap on your cooling vests, mechwarriors, and let's get this deployment on the battlefield.
Primary objective, podcast topic segment, initiating.
Hey everyone, it's me, your host, Nathan. I'm excited to do the first episode of BungleTech, and I am here with my amazing, wondrous, stupendous co-host, Michael. Say hi, Michael.
Hello, Michael.
So, Michael, tell the people out there a little bit about the Michael.
So I guess I'm joining this fresh new podcast, BungleTech. I'm not as long time of a BattleTech player as our fearless leader Nathan is, but I have been getting into it lately, and my background's more in tabletop role playing, which I think has a lot of crossover into BattleTech compared to a lot of other tabletop war games. So that's sort of what got me into it, and Nathan's bottomless enthusiasm has kept me going with it so far.
And now we're doing a podcast, baby. Let's go.
And now we're doing a podcast or something, whatever this is.
So, to people that are unaware, the reason why this is called BungleTech is because I've been playing this game since 1994, on and off. And I love the BattleTech universe. I love the MechWarrior universe. I'm just a huge fanboy. Yet I still make the most basic, ridiculous mistakes. And as Michael's getting into it a little bit more freshly than me, he's constantly finding stuff that we've been doing wrong. And it's generally my fault. I'm gonna be honest. I'm not gonna, dodge that bullet. But I love the game. So I'm really, really excited to have this podcast and sort of have a focus on, how amazing the BattleTech universe is, even when you're breaking all the rules every second game. And that's okay.
And I usually come into games. I'm the sort that likes to read the whole rule book and know the full extent of the rules before I start. But BattleTech's a very deep game, perhaps, with way too many rule books, so it's impossible to learn all of the rules off the top of your head, and especially when Nathan keeps bringing in advanced rules that may or may not exist. So you sort of have to take it on faith and then sort it out after the fact.
That's one thing you listeners are gonna learn about really quick too. I love to make things complicated. And that's why I love BattleTech. I love BattleTech because it is so complicated. But yeah, Michael, so you already talked about it, but I guess when did you start getting into BattleTech?
I don't know. Time is an illusion. I feel like the first game I played, you dragged me over with another friend. Um, that must have been like 2 or 3 years ago. But then we sort of left it, and I don't think I played another game for quite a while after. During the lockdown, you'd set up an online sort of role playing oriented game that we played for a while, which was easier for me to get into. It's more what I'm used to, and now we run games sort of weekly or bi-weekly. I don't know. I guess I'm in it. I didn't mean to. I don't need more games in my life, but here I am doing a podcast about it, apparently.
You're committed now, buddy. Co-host Michael, everybody. What's called you into it? So obviously, I may have dragged you into it a little bit in terms of introduction, but what's sort of interesting about the universe to you and the game system?
Yeah, I think the game's sort of easier to play than a lot of war games. It doesn't look so scary when you play it on a hex grid. It looks like a sort of a tabletop game, and you sort of see that roots in it. That it did start sort of, not sort of a modern war game, but a lot of it has its roots in tabletop gaming. So it's nice and friendly on the outside, and then you start to play it and you realize that it's kind of a giant mess and the rules aren't very balanced. Uh, there are a lot of things that don't really make any sense. And yeah, I don't really know why that would appeal to me. It seems like sort of the antithesis of what I would want, but um, there's something sort of fun about the game, uh, in that it's sort of it's not too slow paced like a lot of sort of simulatory games are, but it's still crunchy and has like all sorts of stuff happening. And I kind of like just getting in and rolling dice and watching huge robots explode in exciting ways. I guess maybe that's something I bring in from the role playing side is you know, I like to play, I like to win and stuff, but I also like to just watch weird stuff happen. And it seems like almost every game of BattleTech has something bizarre go off, and it's just exciting to watch, from the outside. And you try not to cry on the inside when one of your units just catches a lucky critical and explodes into a cloud of SRM based debris.
Sentinel.
That sentinel died heroically.
No sentinel dies heroically. Every sentinel death is a waste of tonnage on the battlefield, Michael. I'm sorry. I had to say it.
So what? Okay, so you've been playing this for a long time. You've been playing this for a lot longer than me. Why come back to it? Why do you want to play the game, and why do you drag me to games every week?
I have lots of fond memories from when I was younger reading the literature. And so pretty recently I decided to start reading it again. And I went through a period where I read like 20 books in the period of 3 months or something like that. And yeah, I don't know. I'm just totally taken away by the universe right now. When I started playing this game when I was really young, like when I picked it up in 1994, at that time I was around 12-ish or something like that. And it was way too complicated for me. And I tried to play it with my friends, but none of my friends were interested in playing it because, it was just too much. It took too long. There were too many rules and all that fun stuff. So I ended up not playing it so much as buying like the technical readouts and reading about the mechs. I remember long trips when we'd be driving like on sort of 7-hour road trips, and I'd have a book and literally I'd have my technical readout in the back. As my mom is driving me somewhere, I'm just reading about the history of mechs. For me, it was so captivating. I just love the universe. I've always been like, I'm a big sort of mecha guy for sure. I really enjoy mecha, but I also enjoy universes that are very gritty, dirty, and grounded. That's what I connect to more. And BattleTech is, in my opinion, the best example of a gritty, down to earth mecha universe. It still has a ton of politics, a ton of, unique characters, different cultures. And sure, in many ways, it feels very at the surface level, especially when the protagonist is from somewhere like the Lyran Commonwealth or whatever, the Western people or whatever. All the other cultures sort of seem like a little bit fantastical and jokish, but once you actually read the books on those other cultures, they just seem so captivating. So I think sort of like BattleTech for me, like I can't really take BattleTech seriously from a competitive perspective because there's some stuff in it that doesn't feel very balanced. And, across the timelines, like if you played something in, 3085 period and you go up to like 3145, there's technical evolution that changes the very balance of the game. So you can't just throw random mechs in, right? But because that's what I like to do, I like to just say, mech from this period, let's smash them together. To me, the whole concept of the game, the pleasure comes from the narrative element. When you're playing something on the table, like in the game we had this weekend, where Dan's Zeus was being swarmed by my elementals, and then to get them off, he punched himself in the face and killed himself. That's just a crazy moment. And it like, to me, you can assume, okay, the pilot's incompetent, or you can imagine it narratively where like this Zeus is like panicking, he's frantic, he's a skilled pilot, but these little guys drilling into the cockpit, they're gonna get him, so frantically, pulls his joystick over and smacks himself right across the jaw. The stories that come out when we're playing the game, even when we're just playing skirmishes, to me, it's so narratively powerful, and oh my god, I love it.
Yeah, and the same way I think I wouldn't enjoy it as much if I didn't sort of approach it from that perspective because yeah, like mechanically, I find BattleTech very old, which makes sense because it's a very old rule set. Um, it's not very clean, it's not very balanced, but it's got just the right combination of things and a long enough history behind it that, yeah, it tells interesting stories pretty much every time you set out to play. On the other hand, you know, on the opposite side, I have never read a piece of BattleTech media. The most I've ever consumed was the Harebrained Schemes BattleTech game, which was good. I liked the story there, but I've never gone looking for books, and I don't really foresee myself ever reading some books on BattleTech lore. But I similar to you, as a kid, reading technical readouts, I do like reading, say, Sarna, reading sort of aggregated technical information. I like the machines and the sometimes silly lore around them. So that's sort of the extent of my interaction with the fiction. I don't have much interest in the broader stories being told, to be honest.
To me, it's really hard to disconnect the broader stories being told from the technical readouts at the same because, like you say, there's some weird flavor that only makes sense. It only makes sense in that timeline, in that context. So I think the universe is really rich. You're indirectly interacting with it always, even if it's not necessarily a conscious sort of choice. When you're playing a mech and a mech handles a certain way, that mech handles a certain way because it was built a certain way in a specific time period for a specific purpose. And that to me is so cool that the designers really thought seriously enough to be like, "Oh my god, let's build this universe. Let's build this universe and let's think about it from a boots on the ground perspective." And then at the same time, at this high level perspective, the politics happening and everything like that. But it seems like so many different levels are dug into. And still, there's obviously tons of holes in the universe. But, when I think about it and I sort of compare it to, like, let's say the other thing that we know very well, Battletech feels so much more full than the Star Wars universe to me. With the Battletech universe, I still feel like there's much more cohesion overall. There's a big picture that pulls things together and a consistent timeline of change that I think really pulls me in. And I love Star Wars.
Yeah, and I think I agree with that. That's the parts of the lore that I enjoy. The broad strokes, the general understandings, even going down to like specific battles and stuff. It's once we start like narrowing it down to specific people and specific like story threads with individuals, that's where it starts to lose me a little bit. Uh, you know, I don't care for the Wolf's Dragoons, and I don't care how many enemies that makes me.
On the first podcast, we're banned, we're canceled.
Yeah, so the Star Wars analogy is actually pretty good. I Star Wars is another thing where I engaged entirely with the Star Wars universe through Wikipedia. And so I don't I the general setup, I enjoy playing with, the general setup of the galaxy. I just have very little interest in the specific stories of people in it. And so it's some of the BattleTech narratives are where it steers a little bit too close to Star Wars territory for me with there's specific people that are, the important ones, and the other billions of people in the galaxy, they're just set dressing. And I like to tell my own stories. You're right. BattleTech's a big, relatively firm universe to tell your stories in. Even if, actually, that's something I would like to do more in our games is nail down a bit more where in the lore particular games we're playing are, you know, provide a little bit more structure to it. Who are the belligerents in a particular battle, and why are they engaging? So I think that's fun, and I was surprised going looking that it seems like um, a lot of other BattleTech players enjoy that too. I don't imagine I don't think many people show up at like a Games Workshop store with a particular like battle in mind for what their Space Marines are going to fight. But in BattleTech, people like their specific, they'll have specific lances for specific factions painted to particular colors. I think that gives a lot of flavor to the stories that you tell on the tabletop.
I totally agree. And I think that, in our recent games, one thing that I've started doing is I've sort of been trying to set the scene because there's lots of rules, optional rules in the game, like force withdrawal and stuff like that. But to me, the concept of force withdrawal makes sense in certain contexts with certain stakes on the line. And I think because I'm so used to the narrative, the high stakes narrative of the BattleTech universe, to me, these encounters are generally quite high stakes. For example, in a previous game, I used my Jenner's self-destruct sequence to destroy an objective. And to me, that was reasonable because I was imagining that the objective was a dirty bomb factory, for example, like it was making nukes. And I'm like, okay, you could see the Jenner doing this, but if you think of it all of a sudden like that little thing that I blew up was just, a day's worth of diapers for the baby population, the stakes really lower. So I think setting the scene narratively really changes the tactics that are available to you from the perspective of does this make sense? Because if not, and if you don't set the scene and you're just constantly chucking pilots at each other, it almost makes it feel like it's just mindless robots fighting each other, right? But it's beyond that. It's about the pilot in the mech. And that's one thing that the BattleTech universe really tries to frame in their media. That even though, mechs are a thing, the universe is all about these gigantic wars. It's not about mechs at the end of the day. It's about the people that are impacted, the pilots, the choices the pilots make, and the crazy situations that they get themselves in. See, I can definitely resonate with that.
Yeah, I mean it's space feudalism. It's all about those space knights on their space mechas fighting for the glory of their space feudal empires.
Till the clans came, man. Space Knights, get out of here.
Yeah, and then everything got weird.
Everything got good.
It's been weird ever since.
Do you have any special memories so far in particular that you have about the game or associated with the game?
I mean, like I can remember instances of fun things happening in almost every game. I think the very first game we played, we just did like a three-way battle. We gave each person had one mech. We very roughly balanced with battle value, but I had like a chunky inner ear mech with ballistics, and the other you two both had fancy highfalutin clan mechs, and I will never forget like doing my best to try and pin you two down, and you were just terrified, jump jetting away and making sure that the two hit modifiers were such I could never hit anyone. No one could hit anyone. Everyone was just jump jetting around in almost pristine condition until the other player mispositioned slightly with a jump jet. You jump jetted behind them and kicked their head off, killing them instantly with no armor breaches. I was like, oh, I guess it's that kind of game. I'm glad I didn't get my head kicked off. I'd say that was probably my like a formative memory for me of BattleTech being like easy come, easy go.
And I think that's really one thing that I think more seasoned BattleTech players will share is that kicking off someone's head is not as uncommon as you'd imagine it to be. I've gotten many a kill that way. The single misstep and then bam, such a good attack. When I was thinking about this and, thinking back to when I was a kid and when I first started playing this game or trying to play it with my friends and having the technical readouts and everything, I remember that because my friends wouldn't play the board game with me, I somehow convinced them to play pretend with me. And so literally we made up fake mercenary missions and then would run around the neighborhood pretending we're mechs. Pew, 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 pew. Like shooting cars and stuff like that.
That is a lot of dedication to the BattleTech genre.
Yeah, it's funny. I can't believe that I forgot about it. And then after the mission, we'd come back. We'd be like, debrief. Okay, how many did you kill? And this is your quota. And then we'd look back through the technical readouts and be like, okay, how many C-bills do we have? What can we buy? And then we buy something. And then we'd imagine ourselves in those mechs walking around shooting stuff. Like, what a crazy thing.
I wonder how big the BattleTech LARP community is.
We can start it.
You could have been at the ground floor on a whole new approach to role playing.
There's any BattleTech LARPers out there? Please send me a message. I want to see that in action.
It might have been doable when there were like those BattleTech sim pods, the mech warrior, the little yeah, whatever they are, the mech pod things.
I forget what they're
'Cause,
called.
yeah, you could put it in like a convention center and get a bunch of people, and you hang out on the drop ship or whatever, and you talk to each other and you do normal boring LARP things, and then you hop into the cockpit and you run a mission. That could be a whole thing. You could do that. I don't think many people would, but you could.
LARPing is a big jump for me, I'm going to be honest. I feel like because of how gritty the universe is, I would just be so dirty all the time. My LARPing experience would be me covering myself in mud and like dirty overalls, a leather jacket, greasy hair, just making myself look like a dirty inner sphere mercenary pilot down on his luck at Galatia. And I can't imagine what type of scenarios he'd get in. Lots of fist fights probably, lots of, scandalous deals, perhaps sabotaging someone's ejection system. I don't know if you have any inclination towards something like that, Michael.
That would be underhanded and absolutely not something I would condone.
Only a monster would do something like that, right, Michael?
Mech pilots are the knights of the modern age, and they're expected to behave themselves with decorum and a certain amount of chivalry, regardless of whether they might be mercenaries and down on their luck. And frankly, the insinuations that you're sending my way right now are extremely untoward. I will file this with the Mercenary Review Board for disciplinary action.
All right, well, that's maybe a story we should get into another time.
Rad.
Tertiary objective. Battlefield Outcome Report segment. Initiating.
This is INN, boots on the ground, at a recent conflict between the Capellan Confederation, the Lyran Commonwealth, and an unnamed mercenary unit. As can be seen behind me on the smoldering battlefield, is the remnants of a Capellan lance, fallen at the heavy hand of a stiff defense by the Lyran Commonwealth. This conflict rotating around a Lyran research facility in the distance, allegedly with promising research on fusion energy. But the highlight of this conflict, a lone mercenary pilot killed from trauma induced by impact. His mech can still be seen in the distance, standing there, nearly unscathed. Let this monument in the distance be a warning to all who step on the battlefield. Even the hardened protection of a Thor won't be enough to protect you from the precision Aero-IV attacks of the Lyran Commonwealth. Reporting live, Nathaniel Smith with the Interstellar News Network. Always first on the scene.
So, what happened and how did it happen? Well, in our game, a summoner, or Thor if you prefer, was knocked out of the game via the pilot dying in the cockpit. And this was when the mech was still in pretty good shape. Well, how did this happen? A variety of unique rules came together for this outcome. First, the catapult that was using the Aero-IV took a direct fire shot, and they utilized their sharpshooter piloting ability. The sharpshooter pilot ability allows you to take a shot with a single weapon with the chance of a through armor critical if it lands. The Aero-IV hit, and this resulted in 4 clusters of 5 damage. Because it's a little bit unclear, we decided that only one of those clusters should have a chance of a through critical. So we rolled it, and that cluster hit the head. And the resulting roll said it's critical time. The critical landed on the cockpit. Because we play with the advanced criticals rule, we use the advanced criticals table. This means that the pilot doesn't die automatically from this cockpit hit. The follow-up roll, however, was a 10, resulting in the pilot taking 4 hits. The pilot attempted to stay conscious, but they had to do 4 consciousness rolls in a row. They passed their first 2 consciousness rolls no problem. Then they failed their third. Fortunately, they also had a pretty cool pilot ability that let them re-roll once in a game. They used it to re-roll the third roll. Stayed conscious. Great. Unfortunately, they failed the fourth. This meant that the summoner was a prime target for a mauler that was approaching. The mauler alpha striked. Even though the summoner hadn't taken much damage before this engagement, a ton of these hits landed on the right arm, which resulted in a critical as the armor was breached. This critical landed on ammo. And we know what happens when ammos get crit. Ammo explosion. Fortunately for the summoner, not the pilot though, the mech had case. So the right arm of the summoner is ejected and the mech survives. Unfortunately for the pilot, case protects the mech, not them so much. The pilot took 2 hits due to the ammo explosion shockwave resonating through the mech. The end result? A summoner standing on the battlefield with a few scuffs on his forehead, a missing arm, and a dead pilot in the cockpit. Rules coming together like this? This is why we play BattleTech.
Secondary objective, rule check discovery segment. Initiating.
Alright, so in this segment of the podcast, we really dive into why we're calling this BungleTech. Frankly, I seem to make a lot of mistakes when I play this game.
Before we jump into that, do you think that we might ever run out of rules mistakes? Like maybe one day we'll actually understand all the rules and not make mistakes? Is that possible? Would that be the death of this podcast?
I have absolutely no faith in us to run out of rule mistakes.
Yeah, especially because so this one in particular, I feel fairly confident that at some point you told me the correct rule, and I knew the correct rule because you told me it. Like I'm pretty sure we played this correctly at least once. Maybe this was way back in the Drew gets his head kicked off mission, but I feel like somewhere in there, the correct rule, it lived deep inside your brain. And then at some point, then you just decided that it would actually be a great idea for mechs to just be able to walk up any sort of incline. Just walk up the side of a building, 13 stories, it doesn't matter. Just walk straight up there.
So the rule we're talking about, if you didn't pick it up from that, is mechs can only transition a maximum of 2 elevations per hex with standard walking or running MP. MP meaning movement points. And we have been not playing that way. We have been playing it that essentially you can walk up any elevation height as long as you have the MP available for it. It was crazy. It's crazy when you think about it. Like walking up buildings, walking up mountains. I remember this game we played with Weston, and the first thing I do is to try to get covers, I dive into a lake that is 8 depth. And I realized that technically, by the correct rules, there's actually no way I could have gotten out of that lake. Because it went from a depth 8 to a level 1.
Your poor little mech should have been consigned to a watery, icy tomb.
He should have, I guess he could have ejected, and his head could have floated up because it was a hatchet man. He has, I think that his head is special in that way, so full cockpit ejection.
Full cockpit ejection for situations just like this.
Just like that, when you accidentally walk or jump into a lake of depth 8. It's insane.
So it's sort of hard to say how much of an effect this would have had because entire strategies for matches would have to be completely different if you're playing this as it is. Like the match when we finally actually looked up the rule and figured out that we were playing it wrong, it would have changed the battle map we were playing on from a bunch of sort of Overwatch areas covering canyons to a narrow claustrophobic knife fight between essentially unclimbable hills. So it's hard to say exactly how much it changes everything. You have to approach the whole strategy for the match is completely different.
That's literally it. It changes everything. All of a sudden, a map board is not just like inconvenient sort of road bumps or potholes. Now it's actually like more of a chessboard. I felt like your movement was so much more structured and limited, and it also changes, the value of jump mechs. Now all of a sudden you realize, oh my goodness, everyone could functionally jump, but they were just really, really bad at it in many ways. You want to get to the top of that level 4 hill, just, spend 5 MP to get there from the bottom, and you're at the top. That's simple. Yeah, jumping mechs are different. The maps are completely different from a strategy perspective.
I think that the mechs that probably benefited the most are the sort of high speed non-jump mechs, because it sort of let them they didn't have to suffer for the lack of jump jets. They could always reposition themselves to wherever they wanted. If you're generating 12 movement points when you're running, then you don't really care about climbing up a 4 height incline. You just keep zooming. So I think they're probably the biggest winners. Like you say, it maybe cheapens jump jets a bit, but quite frankly, I don't feel like jump jets have a hard time. I feel like jump jets are doing pretty fine with or without the mistake. I guess that would by elimination leave the biggest losers as slow moving non-jump jet mechs, because they couldn't climb up the hills anyways.
Yeah.
If you got 4 movement points, you can't get up a building anyways. So
And it increases the survivability of light mechs, right? Because all of a sudden you can't have just, if there's a level 3 mountain in front of you, you can't have a heavy assault just say, I'm gonna walk up this mountain. I also think that indirect fire mechs for like LRMs, for example, now all of a sudden they got a big boon too, because they can actually position themselves in a way where they're not easy to be hunted down by other mechs.
I like the sort of framing that you're giving. Like it's like, like a new edition of BattleTech dropped and they like changed the rules and like, oh yeah, this is gonna really hurt those indirect fire mechs. And it's not that like, oh yeah, we're just a bunch of dummies, a bunch of bunglers.
Exactly. It is such a huge mistake. And, you know, the funny thing is, because we play with advanced rules, I know about climbing, I know about dangle and drop, I know about leaping. These are techniques you can do to surpass the elevation limitations. But when I was reading those rules, I so believed that you could go up higher than level 2. I was completely in disbelief why you would use these things. Why would I climb? Because maybe I don't have enough MP to make it in one turn, so I can do that over multiple turns. But to me, it was so much more niche. And now that I realize we've been really messing up this basic rule, it's like, okay, these advanced techniques now actually have a lot of purpose and they make a lot more sense.
But it's also, maybe it's not like a huge red flag when you're like, oh, there's this weird advanced rule. I don't know why you'd ever use this, because honestly, that's my perception of BattleTech, is that many of the advanced rules are weird and kind of useless. So I can understand, not thinking twice about it.
Yeah, there's so many niche rules as you know, and that's what I love about it. Like I love all those little niche things like overcharging your PPC, rapid firing your AC, toning down the damage of your lasers so they do less heat, putting your machine gun on rapid fire mode. These are all attack modes, but they're so niche. It's one of the reasons I love the game. I love the game because there's all these little niche things. But this is a clear example of how, the developers actually knew the rules and they're like, oh yeah, we should, do something to make it so mechs can actually go above level 2, but make it more challenging, make a consequence to it. Because that was more realistic. And then there's, me looking at it and being like, oh yeah, in this one specific use case, this is useful. Just me misunderstanding things, which is going to be a constant theme of this show. I feel like all my BattleTech knowledge and experience and MechWarrior experience, it all just like goes in a pot and melts together. And then I pull random stuff out. And sometimes it's the right rule, sometimes it's melded with another rule, all this wacky stuff.
So how is this new understanding of how to move, which I think is on like page 15 of the Battle Mech manual? Now that you've gotten that far in the rules, how is this going to change your approach in matches?
Well, it's gonna change. It changes everything. Everything's different now. Oh my god. So I like to play lights, right? And I think it's just, well, it's gonna make me double down in lights more. I just will look at maps differently because before, I was so focused on evasion is in movement. If I want to evade something, if I want to hide, the effective way to do it is to get my target modifier high up by moving a lot or jumping or, going to tree cover. But now I realize, well, another good option is actually use the terrain to completely hide, knowing that the big heavy mechs that are hunting down my lights physically are not going to be able to climb that hill. That's a big change, right?
Yeah, but I mean, does that really affect you that much? Is a heavy mech like even if the heavy mech could walk over that hill towards you, your light would be able to get out of there even faster? Because we had a scenario like that a few matches ago where I had sort of my uh, heavies. I think I had what did I have? Um, it was a hunchback and something kind of chunky. Oh, a cataphract. My hunchback and a cataphract got your something annoying and medium light, like backed it into a corner, and then your little thing with its like 9 movement points just sprinted straight up the wall and away like it was freaking Naruto, leaving my poor hunchback and cataphract unable to follow because even if we could walk up the hill, you were already 3 hills away by the time we would have made it up the first one. So does it really affect your light mechs that much? Like,
I think it creates more traps on the battlefield. So, for example, I think in that instance it was a legal movement, right? That was a level 2 movement change. But let's say it's a level 3 movement and I don't want to climb because climbing by the rules is really, really dicey. So I don't want to climb. I feel like it creates a corner where I know someone can't attack me from behind. It creates a little sanctuary. I sort of feel like it's going to open up my options. It's also going to reinforce the importance of jump jets even more, in my opinion. And it's sort of going to, from my impression at least, I think it's going to allow me to play the mechs I like to play more. I think it's going to allow me to really, really do more lights and mediums and still feel like I can look at the game board just differently. I can just lock off complete arcs now because, okay, this literally is no longer an option of approach. I feel like it might add tension, if that makes sense.
oh yeah, totally. Yeah. I I think so. It's really interesting. I actually I have almost the complete opposite conclusion from you. So obviously, I agree. This makes jump jets better. Jump jets are great, obviously. Um, but for the non jump capable mechs, I actually see this as being harder for your lights and mediums, and I see this as a boon for sort of my medium heavy direct fire approach to things. My doctor and I tend to like the standoff mechs at long range, covering particular fire zones and, getting people in the open when they step out of position. And so I see this as a big win for me, because your light mechs will now be funneled into specific routes. And by covering those with the right types of mechs, you can lock down even very fast, very evasive units. So, well, I guess we'll have to see how that plays out on the battlefield because it's interesting that we both feel like we've got better options now.
Yeah, and I think that's true. Like, I totally agree with you as well. Like, it goes both ways, right? The tension that's going to be built, the limited options, I think lights can leverage them effectively. I think heavies and assaults can leverage them effectively. But what it does is it just adds an additional layer of strategy to the game, which, in my opinion, helps remove, the big gun wins sort of mentality of BattleTech. Not that that's true, but that's just how I sort of the impression that I have.
Yeah, and I think it brings it a little bit closer to the type of battles I like in BattleTech, um, which is, I like the units being limited. I like the sort of earlier era stuff where units are in sometimes completely crippled by particular aspects of their design. And this means that, yeah, non-jump capable mechs, maneuvering is a huge thing, where you're facing, where you're running, because if you blunder, if you put yourself in the wrong position, you might not have a way out of it anymore.
It's funny because when we were, talking about this before deciding to record this as the topic for this episode, I was thinking back to my childhood, and I actually remember consciously when I made this decision when I was young, when I was first playing BattleTech, when I was around 12. I'm on the board in the 1994, I think it was the 3rd edition box, the one that came with the first plastic miniatures of BattleTech. So I had them out, I'm playing. I have an archer and I have a crusader on the field. Both of these units that I had didn't have jump jets. And I remember fighting and getting to myself on, like, I think there was this mountain map. 2 maps came with the pack, and one was more mountainy and hilly. And I positioned my mechs in a way where they were surrounded by level 3 hills. And I remember consciously thinking to myself, like, that rule's stupid. Mechs should be able to climb and go high. Ignoring it and just deciding to spend the MB. But I think that rule, when I was looking through the books, I don't know how I missed it. But it's so funny that I can remember specifically deciding to ignore that rule when I was like 12.
These are supposed to be all-terrain vehicles. They got legs. They can walk up stuff. I'm a kid. I got legs. I can walk up stuff.
Exactly. I've walked up a hill. A mech is cooler than me. Clearly a mech can walk up a steep hill. I remember I was also thinking about other rules I didn't do. Like, for example, when I was young, I'm like, why would missiles miss? Then full LRM 20 should hit. And they shouldn't even cluster. They should all go to the same point. This is technology. Why would this not work? I loved LRM mechs because all the LRMs were hitting with their full damage all the time in a single location. And I know that influenced my choices when I played the games later because I was like, oh my God, LRM boats. Yeah, man, I have done so much wrong. I definitely think that this one it's definitely the biggest discovery we've had so far about rules we've been breaking. And we've broken a lot of rules. So,
like I say, buried all the way on page 15 of the Battle Mech manual. Quite a discovery we made.
Those first 30 pages are just filler, man. You just scan through them.
Of course, you know how mechs move. You count movement points. Like, this is elementary.
It's so simple. Oh my goodness. So simple.
And then we have the misfortune of sharing this along to a bunch of new players who've not read the books and have just taken what we say at face value. Those poor, poor fools.
Those poor, poor fools. Those poor, poor fools. That is definitely the biggest mistake we've made in the rules so far, but there's more to come. Make sure to tune in our next episode for more bungles.
Tertiary objective. Stories of the Inner Sphere segment. Initiating.
Dropship, Blood of Huntress, Idlewind, Draconis Combine. 10th of March, 3050. Star Colonel Paul Moon glared at Idlewind on the view screen of the Blood of Huntress, as if it were a rotting piece of meat, foul and disgusting. His officers of the 3rd Cavalier's assault trinary were assembled around him. He could feel their gaze split between the planet and him.
They are anxious, which means they will be aggressive.
It made him proud. Aggression was core to the Smoke Jaguar psyche. That and ruthlessness. The Star Colonel embraced those feelings wantonly.
Our ruthlessness will pave the road to Terra and ultimate victory. This,
he said, flicking his hand dismissively at the image of Idlewind as he turned to face them,
is Idlewind. It is a planet hardly worthy of our attention, other than it lies in our invasion corridor and stands in defiance to our clan. We reached out to the defenders of this world only to find disappointment. They have a battalion of heavy armor and a regiment of mechanized infantry. We were surprised they had the audacity to call themselves the Idlewind Stormtroopers. As if calling themselves something as proud as Stormtroopers has the power to make it so.
Contempt rolled off his tongue as he spoke.
I would ignore this world. It is beneath our attention as warriors. Free birth scum and tanks and inferior tactical gear. hardly worthy an orbital bombardment, let alone an honorable fight. Then again, what do we expect from the inner sphere but such feeble defenses? It is as our Khan said, these houses are mere shadows of the warriors we are.
He chose his words deliberately to compel his star commanders to bid low. Several of them nodded as he spoke, mumbling agreement under their breaths.
We will take this world because our Khan deems it so. I have been given this honor, but I share the honor with you. I cannot see us committing the entire Trine area against such weak foes. So I put it to you, my star commanders. Who would like the honor of quickly destroying these stormtroopers so that we can move on to more worthy targets?
Star Commander Matthew Wimmer spoke up first. Star Colonel, armor, even inferior armor, requires armor as a response. I bid a star of our clan's finest Omnimechs best to do this quickly and effectively. Star Commander Farron of Sweep Star stepped up. The female elemental star commander was even taller than Paul Moon, and, in some ways, more muscular. A star of Omnimechs against a mere battalion of ground armor. That bid is unworthy of the Smoke Jaguar. My elementals are more than a match for these so-called Idlewind stormtroopers. Where Matthew would seek quick victory, I prefer a challenge for my warriors. As such, I bid 4 points of elementals for the honor of taking this planet. Her bravado was met by murmurs of agreement and respect. Star Commander Joel stepped forward. Shorter than most elementals, he made up for his lack of height with sheer muscles. They called him the Jungle Jaguar for his remarkable bulk. Star Colonel, you've heard from 2 of your commanders. One would use a sledgehammer to swat a fly. One goes in to give her warriors exercise. I came to the inner sphere to fight, as did my warriors. I do not seek just victories, but victories worthy of the Smoke Jaguar. I bid 2 points of my best warriors to take on the Idlewind stormtroopers. There were nods from the other officers, and Paul Moon crossed his arms and stared down at Star Commander Joel with a stern expression that was a mix of respect and honor.
Joel has been chafing for an opportunity to prove himself, and his bid reflects it. Very well. Are there any others who would challenge Star Commander Joel's bid?
Star Commander Wimmer shook his head. Star Commander Farron crossed her arms and said nothing. Moon gathered himself.
Very well then, Star Commander Joel. Idlewind is yours to take. Let us contact these stormtroopers and see where they desire to die.
Idlewind, Stormtroopers Headquarters, Breezemont, Idlewind, Draconis Combine, 2 hours later. Tysa Mark Lutz of the Idlewind Stormtroopers stared at the view screen with a look of puzzlement on his face. Years before, he had been a young Tyee fighting in the War of 3039, leading this tank lance to victory after victory. He had been posted to Idlewind because one does what the Dragon demands. They had promoted him and given him a posting along the periphery, commanding a militia unit. Some officers would have seen it as a just reward, a soft posting where no action was likely. Others would have seen it as a punishment, being sent out to the middle of nowhere to defend a backwater world against threats that would likely never arise. Mark Lutz saw his posting more simply a duty. He had long ago pledged himself to serve the Dragon. If this was where the coordinator deemed he was needed, he would be pleased to serve here. He had not rested on his laurels either. Lutz had turned a ragtag pair of companies into a well-trained armor battalion. His regiment of infantry was mostly volunteer militia, but he had ensured that they were trained to fight the kind of wars that came to the periphery, raiders and pirates. Their equipment was not new production tanks and transports, but he had made certain that they were in the best operating condition. Lutz was prepared for a battle that might never come, until a few days ago. Now he faced something different. Clan Smoke Jaguar. They had showed up in system 10 days ago at the Nadir jump point and leisurely burned into planetary orbit. When they did reach out to him, they demanded to know what forces he would defend Idlewind with. With all the Dragon can muster, he'd replied. My battalion of armor and regiment of mechanized infantry. The Jaguar's language was precise, very military, with no contractions. The question of defending forces was a warning, and he saw it as such. These are not periphery raiders. Raiders do not ask such questions. They demand surrender and submission. Seyla Lutz had immediately put his troops on alert. Now, the image flickered before him, and he saw a massive figure larger than any human he had seen before. Judging by the officer standing beside him, he was not dressed as a raider, but in a perfectly pristine gray uniform, devoid of medals.
I am Star Colonel Paul Moon of Clan Smoke Jaguar. You are the commander of these stormtroopers, Quiaf?
The last word puzzled Lutz, so he ignored it. I am Seyla Mark Lutz, the commanding officer of the militia forces on Idlewind. I serve at the behest of the coordinator, Takashi Kurita.
Very well then. You still intend to defend this world with all the forces you have, Quiaf?
I do not know what Quiaf means, but yes, it is my intent to fight you with all we have. Who would do otherwise? Why would an attacker pose such a question?
Very well. The warriors of the 3rd Cavalier's Assault Trinary will honor you by bidding 2 points of elementals under Star Commander Joel to take this world.
Lutz winced. You have me at a disadvantage. I do not know what an elemental is, nor what a point represents. Moon nodded, seeming to understand.
I forget how ignorant you spheres are to our ways. I am an elemental warrior, genetically bred for battle. We wear suits of battle armor. A point is 5 warriors.
The Seyla was staggered by the proposition. You were sending 10 armored troopers to take on my militia?
Alf, Moon said. It is an aggressive bid, but Star Commander Joel is an exceptional warrior, as are those under his command.
They send their troops to their death. And if I defeat this Star Commander?
Assuming you fight honorably, you may yet win this world. Joel may bring in the rest of the trinary that was bid in the fight, but he does so at great risk to his honor.
Your ways are new and strange to me.
You will learn them if you survive. The Smoke Jaguar invasion will teach your Combine a great deal about our people. So, Seyla Mark Lutz of the Draconis Combine. As the challenged, the right to choose the field of battle goes to you.
This Paul Moon wanted me to tell him my forces, and now he wants me to pick where we fight? He mentioned an invasion. This is not some periphery scum or an arrogant federated Commonwealth commander. He is massive, one of these elementals. There is a forested region some 2 kilometers outside of Breezemont, the capital of this world. If you are intent on fighting, that is where I choose to face you.
We shall arrive tomorrow at midday, Seyla.
Lutz nodded. If you wish to fight there, we will be prepared. This will be a quick battle for you, Paul Moon. We shall face you there.
Well bargained and done,
Paul Moon said. Then his image flickered off in the view screen. Tai Benjamin Kondo, who commanded the stormtroopers' armor, had been standing off camera to the side, silently taking in the conversation. Speak, Lutz said to his junior officer. We must be prepared. There's much about these Smoke Jaguars we do not know or understand. Their language is different. You saw that, and what do they call it? Elemental. They are giants. These are not invaders. They are aliens in many respects. I agree. They send 10 warriors to take us all on, which means they very well may have superior technology. Their size suggests they are performing abhorrent genetic manipulation. We must assume the worst. Tai Kondo nodded. We must tip the fight to our advantage. We've had a drought for the last month. The forest you've chosen for the fights is dry. I suggest we drench it with napalm. When these smoked jaguars land, we ignite the forest and burn them." The thought of burning warriors to death was unappealing, but so was the prospect of losing Idlewind to these invaders. I will not be the one to disappoint the coordinator. I approve of your plan. Do so quickly and discreetly. Hi! These jaguars will rue the day they came here. That was a reading from the short story The Flames of Idlewind, written by the legendary Blaine Lee Pardoe. The rest of the story can be found in Shrapnel, the official BattleTech magazine, issue number 1. And that's a wrap to this episode of BungleTech. Thank you for listening. If you have any comments or questions, you can email us at bungletech@outlook.com or talk to us on Twitter at BungleTechTweet. Until next time, Mech Warriors, good fortunes on the battlefield. Seyla.
All podcast objectives complete. Podcast shutdown sequence initiated.